Lukhona, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time, sir, this evening. The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the ANC, perhaps I need to be specific. Firstly, let's deal with what he says is not a day of celebration, and is that a good choice of words given the state of the ANC-led alliance? He says that this is rather a day of reflection as the country witnesses the first 100 days of the GNU in office.
Well, good evening, Xoli, and to your viewers and your guest there in studio. I suppose, it's a play of words because it comes across to ordinary people as though that it is a celebration. The ANC has spent some money making sure that it gets its volunteers, in the front office of Luthuli House, and it has gotten some provincial leaders to fly in from various provinces, Northern Cape, the Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, and so on to join the reflection moment. But I mean, this has been quite an interesting pattern now in the development of the ANC. They once went on, provincial reviews, manifesto reviews, I think at some point last year, and these were held in stadia. In different stadiums across different provinces, and I suppose it's what it appears to be. It appears to be a celebration to most people, but I do think that to the ANC's leadership, credibility, there's something positive. Whether you disagree or agree with what was happening today, there's something positive though that this may do for the broader membership, and that is to deepen the culture of accepting electoral losses, making the most of what is possible, and cementing the reality of coalition governments in the consciousness of ANC members, so that even in future, particularly in the 2026 upcoming local government elections, when the party experiences further electoral losses, their volunteers and ordinary membership and supporters may then be able to concede and accept coalition arrangements in various municipalities.
Yeah. Before we deal with the quick highlights of what he points to as green shoots, you say that this is a positive for the ANC and some of its structures. But what about the people of South Africa? Do they see the GNU being in office as a positive? Because there is this constant, if you want to call it, the messaging that the people of South Africa no longer wanted the ANC to govern on its own. Instead, they wanted for political parties in South Africa to govern as a collective.
I think, Xoli, that's an interesting phraseology as well, which the ANC and the president have adopted to say that the GNU is what South Africans wanted to see, political parties working together. There's another different phraseology you may wish to choose politically, and to say that the majority of South Africans rejected, or the majority of voters, let's put it that way, rejected the ANC and no longer wanted the ANC to continue with its political hegemony and to govern with unfettered power. And in actual fact, if you think about it, the opposition to the ANC has 60% of the vote. I know that other, entities, and I mean, I'm sure you'll talk to this with your guest from the SACP, may wish, may have wished for an ANC-MK-EFF combination. There might well be a section of voters who may have wished for an all-opposition, coalition without the ANC, because leading up to these elections, the ANC had been dubbed as mismanaging the state. I mean, the president himself of the ANC saying that, voters were indicating that they are concerned with progress, with progress in the last 10 years, particularly around issues of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. But you must ask who was in government when those things started to go on a serious downward spiral and to leave South Africans in need and want in many ways, and that was under the ANC government. And therefore, those concerns over the last, over the last decade, over the last 15 years of developments in the country have been a question on the ANC's ability to continue leading the country, rather than just throwing it to the political landscape in generalities, Xoli.
He then talks about, Lukhona Mnguni, the ANC's manifesto policies that are now the priority of what is being implemented by the government of national unity. And even the tone he uses there is that of an ANC that is firmly in charge of implementing the desires of the ANC. How is that likely to sit with the GNU partners like the Democratic Alliance, who can be quite vociferous?
Well, I suppose every party in the, in the Grand Coalition, a la GNU, only it takes its propaganda machinery and repurposes whatever is happening. I mean, we saw some posts coming from the Democratic Alliance saying that the cost of fuel was decreasing month on month over the last 5 months because of the GNU and the DA's involvement, when we know that there are many variables that influence the liter of petrol in this country and related fuels. And now that's propaganda, Xoli. What we do know, and I also find it surprising, the president closer to his closing remarks, talking about how, the people of South Africa are getting behind the objectives, the program of the government of national unity. But we just have to go back to his opening of parliament address on the 18th of July. When the cabinet had come out of the cabinet Lekgotla, but in that address, the president made it very clear that the parties to the government of national unity, or those who signed the statement of intent, still needed to go on a strategy session so that they can actually then get to adopt a program of action. And we know, as the Deputy President said, Deputy President of the ANC said earlier today, that they only met 3 weeks ago. They have not even established that clearinghouse that he was talking about, in terms of when there are disagreements amongst parties, they go through a clearinghouse before they are escalated to the leaders of the parties and to cabinet. Therefore, Xoli, there seems to be messaging, positive messaging, but the reality of what has happened is that there's some distortion and potential deception that is coming from the politicians. What we do know is that there's a statement of intent. There isn't even a semblance of a coalition agreement about what binds and unites these parties. And in fact, there isn't even agreement on a minimum viable political program that binds them together and the priorities that they are going to champion. And I think it would be well to prioritize those issues rather than be inward looking into political parties, particularly as we are about to hear the first ever mid-term budget policy statement under a coalition government in South Africa in a few weeks to come.
Talking about that minimum program in a moment, I'll ask you as a final question about that minimum program with its alliance partners. But quickly, before we get to that, is he correct, though, to say or to point out that there have been some positives coming out of this GNU? He points to surveys that are suggesting that the country is received positively by financial markets. There is a groundswell of positivity around South Africa. He talks about load shedding being now a thing of the past. I'm paraphrasing him here. He points to the Labour Department that is hard at work doing inspections that they're supposed to be doing in workspaces where South Africa's labour laws are being enforced. I'm not so sure whether we can take him at his word when it comes to fighting crime, but is he correct, generally speaking, that there is a wave of positivity that comes with this GNU?
Generally, Xoli, I suppose in the aftermath of the election, we did see a rand rally, particularly at the announcement of the government of national unity. And I think part of the positivity was exactly what the president alluded to, the fact that the ANC actually conceded defeat and did not seek to hold on to power by undemocratic means. And therefore, the concession that the ANC had lost elections forms part of the liberation legacy of the ANC to truly deliver a democracy, not for its own means, but for the benefit of the people of South Africa. So I think in that one respect, of course, there was all the reason to have a rand rally. Of course, it was followed by markets and a green JSE. I think as time goes by, and it was interesting, I mean, and we can't separate the state president and the ANC president, because earlier today he actually wrote about those polls we are talking about, particularly the Ipsos poll that said, South Africans think that the country is moving in a positive direction. And the president said this is no longer just a sentiment for its own sake. But I do think that he stretched a bit the meaning of what sentiment means. I do still think that much of the positivity around this coalition arrangement that we have nationally is driven by sentiment and not by concrete terms. If you actually read the report by Ipsos, Xoli, you will find that in terms of the underlying factors that would naturally influence sentiment, unemployment, questions around corruption perceptions in government, there still seems poverty and inequality. There still seems to actually be consensus amongst the people of South Africa in terms of what their problems are and what their worries are. Yeah. The worries on crime actually have not gone down. The worries on unemployment have not gone down. A bit of a decrease on perceptions around, corruption in government and political corruption generally. But overall, the underlying drivers of sentiment have not changed. Therefore, people are not saying that materially things have changed in the socio-economic landscape, including the issues of fighting poverty and high cost of living. Yeah. So I do think that this must, as the business leaders that have answered to the business confidence survey, to say this must be optimism taken with degrees of caution.
Final question to you as we segue into my next conversation. The SACP is in studio with me. They have boycotted what President Ramaphosa, president of the ANC, was doing outside its headquarters tonight. And add to that, they say through their weekend report on the back of their Central Committee meeting that since the elections, they have not met as the alliance to agree on some minimum program. Question though, if the SACP is taking an oppositionist stance, which is what I think they communicated at the weekend, that they are officially opposing this GNU, should they still have people like Bladen Nzimande sitting as cabinet ministers, or are they speaking from two sides of their mouths?
Only, it's a pity we have limited time, but just to answer you quickly, I mean, it was the SACP itself that overly exposed itself to the patronage of the ANC when it comes to government, when the party took a decision to amend its own constitution and allow for its general secretary to be a member of cabinet, something that was deemed in the constitution to be a full-time position. Now, the SACP has benefited over the years by its members being ANC members and then being elected to government. Now that they may well be aggrieved, unfortunately, there's very little that the SACP brings to the table for the ANC. The ANC needs partners who are going to ensure that it retains its power in the state. And unfortunately, the SACP boycotted its own resolution to prospectively stand for its, on its own in the 2024 elections. And it will be interesting to understand what calculations the SACP made ahead of the 2024 elections, when it was quite clear to them that the alliance was not going to be reconfigured in the manner and perspective that they hoped it would be reconfigured, and that the ANC was not interested in the reconfiguration of the alliance. But the SACP then abandoned what was available as a tool for itself to contest in the 2024 government elections. And I suppose it still poses a material question. It might be one thing for us to focus on what the spat between the SACP and ANC means. It's another for the SACP to take its political destiny to its own hands, and perhaps independent of the ANC.